Welcome to the Wisdom Seed podcast. In this episode, Michael Carroll sits down with Andrew Hyman, a consultant at Bain Company, a firm that provides advice to public, private, and nonprofit organizations. He's also the president of Applied Mindfulness Training. Andrew and Michael talk shop about what exactly does a consultant do, and reminisce about Andrew's father, Patton Hyman, founder of Applied Mindfulness Training and a close friend of Michael's. This episode was originally produced by Applied Mindfulness Training as part of their Mindful Voices series, and we're grateful for their partnership in sharing it here. You can learn more about their work at appliedmindfulnesstraining.org.
Andrew, before we get started, give me just a little background on your practice. What is your relationship with the meditation practice? I'm just wanting to get a quick headline there.
Sure. So I have been meditating since I was 6 years old, starting with the direction of my parents.
Right.
I started with Shambhala training at the age of 10. You actually taught my level 2 in 1999 at Carmen Scholing. I don't know if you remember that, up in the little attic.
Yeah, I remember that room. Well, was it any good? Was it any good?
It was good. It was good. You have a very charismatic style, and I still remember your story about the dog in the apartment barking around nonstop and fixating on you whenever you walked in the door.
Right.
So I've been a long time meditator. I would say my meditation practice starting, I meditated quite a bit through high school as I was deeply involved with Shambhala training, doing all the levels up to, Drawla. It changed at some point. And then I basically sort of did not practice very much during college and came back to it immediately after college, where I finished up the rest of the Sacred Path of the Warrior up to Golden Key.
Right.
And then I maintained an almost daily meditation practice, I would say, until a couple of years ago, not even a couple of years ago, like a year and a half ago or so. And so now my practice is much more intermittent as I've had my daughter, but I've also done like a 10-day silent meditation retreat. So
how old's your daughter?
She is 13 months.
Oh, dude. That's, I always say having a little baby is like scotch taping your kidney on the front of your car.
There's nothing to keep you fixed in the present moment, like having a little baby you're responsible for that could dart anywhere, and she's just starting to walk. So,
man, congratulations. Yeah. It's a beautiful thing. All right. That's good. I'm just, I just wanted to get a sense, like you could have told me that you were a Theravada Buddhist. I just wasn't curious. I was just curious. Cool. All right.
With my parents, that'd be a little bit of a surprise.
So welcome, Andrew. Thank you for joining us on this Mindful Voices, which is, as you are well aware, it's conversations are about how practitioners of mindfulness awareness meditation bring that practice into their ordinary lives, and particularly into their careers and their livelihoods, but generally into our ordinary lives. So thank you for jumping in on this conversation. Just a little bit about you to the audience. Of course, I ask you to say more about yourself later, but Andrew is a consultant with some of the more sexier consultancies like Mercer and Bain. I mean, I don't think Mercer's around anymore, right? I mean, they got merged, didn't they?
So Mercer had been acquired by Marsh & McLennan Companies. They were part of a large professional services conglomerate, even when I worked for them 10, 11 years ago.
Yeah, we used to use Mercer for HR stuff back when I was in publishing. So for our audience, you're a consultant with those. You have your MBA from the University of Chicago, economics from Emory. And, it's interesting on looking at your background and this is a fun part of being a consultant, because I do consulting as well, not like you do, but, is you get into so many different industries. I saw from your background that you've done Salesforce development, merger integration, and then most recently some higher ed work, where I've been doing some work as well in higher ed. So we'll explore that together. And then you've been practicing mindfulness awareness meditation since you were 6 years old. That's and what you're 18 now. How old are you now?
I am 34.
34.
As my doctor likes to remind me. Yes.
And you're a young man. You've been practicing since you were very young. So welcome. Let me start off this conversation with this, and it really has to do with your father, Patton. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about him. As you are well aware, your father was a real pioneer in the area of applied mindfulness. He and I, as you are well aware, worked together, did cool stuff. We ran some conferences and helped some universities like Virginia Tech and Westchester University roll out applied mindfulness conferences together. And as you know, your dad wrote the book, The Inner Advantage, about how attorneys can use this practice in the practice of law. And he and I would have fun conversations about that. But I guess I'm asking you, what was it like? What was it like to be with your dad? I mean, I loved your dad. I was like a Southern gentleman, could hang out. He was a Southern lawyer from Atlanta. But what did you learn from him? What was it like for you as a young boy growing up with him and really seeing how he was working with this whole notion of applied mindfulness?
Yeah, well, Michael, first, thank you for taking the time to speak with me. I've been a big fan of the podcast that you've done so far as part of the Mindful Voices series. So it is an honor to be here today, and I'm happy we get to spend some time together this evening. What did I learn from my father? That is a good question. I could probably spend a lot of time trying to list off all of the things that I learned from him. Unfortunately, I learned my golf game from him. I don't know if you ever went out to the courses, but
I don't play golf.
Yeah, well, neither he nor I were very good at golf, but we both like getting out there and just spending time together. And I guess the first thing that I would say I learned from my dad, and this may be a little meandering, but we'll see where it goes,
Please.
is, he was old when I was born. He was 47 when I was first born, which meant that he was 65 when I turned 18. And so he retired, when I was 8 or 9 years old from law practice, bought an RV with my mom, pursued sort of what would be considered a dream vacation, traveling around in an RV with your family around the country for a year, seeing natural wonders in this country. We went to the Everglades, we went to Big Bend National Park, we went to the Grand Canyon, we went up to Denali. Cool. It was a really formative trip, and it was an interesting time. I mean, I was 9, my sister was 13. There was never a shortage of family drama, whether it was between me and my sister or any other permutation you can think of. But that was one of the first times where I saw that he prioritized family and the relationships that we have together, as blood relatives, as kin, as, a relationship that is hard to replace. Certainly if it is, somewhat functional. Obviously, families can be a source of a lot of trauma, but they can also be the source of a lot of joy. And so I saw my dad retire from a law career where he could have made a lot of money, but would not have been as present in our lives, spend an entire year of his life driving around trying to teach us about geology and astronomy and local history and things like that. And then once we settled in Vermont, I saw him continue that, that pattern of behavior where he was continuing to try and find meaning in his life and try and, be of service to others, which, the work that you all did together. And he spoke very highly of you too. So it's really been a pleasure to listen to you and see some of the wisdom that he saw in you come through in this podcast series. But he would always try to do what he thought was best for the family. And he would always put his family, my mom, my sister, and me, first. And I think that was one of the most important things that I gleaned from him, that, the relationships with your family, the relationships with, those around you that you care about, those are hard to replace.
Yeah.
And so they're important to cherish, and they're important to invest your time and energy into.
I really loved your father. He was a very noble man. He had a presence that was noble and confident in his kind of gentleness. You know what I mean?
And that's another great point, because I think that one of the things that I picked up from him by example was trying to manifest kindness in the world. He was not always kind. He had a temper, which is unfortunately something I inherited at times too. But I just found that as he went through the world and interacted with people, whether it was, friends bumping into at the grocery store, or, people working in retail, or my friends when they would come to the house to cause trouble, he would be, happy and kind and a warm presence.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the reasons why I enjoyed spending so much time with him, and why it was, such a pleasure to get to have, my teenage years with a dad who wasn't at work, and we could go golf every day during the summer, and, we could hang out in the evenings and watch TV and watch movies and things like that.
Yeah, I hear you. I think that as maybe we didn't say this to the audience, but your dad passed away. How many years ago now has it been?
2018, I believe.
Yeah. And he's still in my mind. I can see his face. I can see that face of his, that smile, that kind of laugh that he had. But the way he presented these teachings I guess he lectured at the Vermont Bar and taught in various legal settings, helping lawyers understand the application of mindfulness in the practice of law, around working with fear and training the mind to attend to the experience that it's having, and also the sense of presence as a big part of how one influences, and how mindfulness. He was kind of a pioneer in that, and bringing that conversation into legal settings. Did you ever chat with him about that, or explore those principles with him?
So like you mentioned, I've been meditating for a long time. So I think I always saw the value of meditation. I don't know if challenging him on the concept of bringing mindfulness into legal settings was ever something that I really did. Mm-hmm. I think so. But I like to think that he liked bouncing ideas off of me, because I was of a younger generation and would have a different perspective. We can fact check this with my mom, but I believe that I helped come up with the title "The Inner Advantage" for his book. And so
now, that's reality. I don't care what anyone says. It's history being.
It's on the record.
Okay.
So I would. I would help him basically, I would say it now, like beat up the ideas that he was presenting.
Right.
And so I would try and help challenge the ideas as they were being structured. I guess not the concept of whether it would be valuable, but certainly thinking about, how do you tailor this to an audience, and how do you still make the important parts of the message land while removing the more spiritual, potentially less inviting aspects to folks who are not looking for that type of experience in their life. And I was actually thinking about that earlier today as we were talking, given that that's a lot of what you do, but in the business world, right? I mean, a lot of the consulting you do is that same sort of approach, rather than law, but in business.
Yeah, and I do think that you and your dad found that balance, in that book. I think that there's certain phrases in there that go right to the meat of the matter, without bringing up any religious or non-secular or kind of woo-woo kinds of stuff. And so thank you. Thank you for working with your book. And thank you.
Let me be clear. I can't take any credit for the writing in the book. So that was.
Yeah, but nonetheless, thank you. Thank you. And thank you for your dad. Your dad was a wonderful man. And I'm glad to see that you've, taken on a big part of his heart and his approach and brought them into your life too. So, all right. Well, let's now move on because you're on the show. Let's transition to you. So, this consulting, why don't you explain to the audience what does a consultant do when you working at a high level with a Bain consultancy? I mean, this is the high level, high paid consultancy. Well, how would you kind of give us some headlines on exactly what is it that you men and women do up there?
Yeah. It's a great question. I think it's the most common question that I get when people ask me like what I do. I say, "Oh, I'm a consultant." Like, well, what do you consult? That doesn't really tell us much of anything. And so the way that I try to describe it, because Bain's approach to consulting is probably the most generalist. So in general, we don't specialize in an industry or function, but we'll work across industries and across functions within the business and across various sort of capability areas, we call it, to try and, I guess, to put it simply, we help organizations solve problems. Generally, they are some of the most important problems that the organization faces at a given time. But then there's also times we help out on very specific, very tactical challenges that they can't crack on their own. And so what we do to sort of solve problems is we have an approach of breaking down and analyzing complex problems into much more manageable analytical units, I guess, chunks, we say. We like, what are the buckets? What are the categories that we can break this problem down to? And then when we think about the various dynamics at play, whether it is, different competitors' products in a market, whether it is, the impact of, say, the decoupling of the U.S. and China on supply chains, what are all of the implications of the dynamics in the situation that we're supporting our clients in, that we can provide a more objective point of view on. So the clients typically have years of experience in the industry, the actual people that we're working with at these large enterprises and like you mentioned, higher education institutions. We work with a range of nonprofits as well. Private equity funds and other investors. We'll work with organizations, pretty much every type except for governments, really. And what we do is we try to take our objective third-party research approach to problem solving and work with our clients to leverage their internal expertise, their knowledge. Of course, we have experts at Bain as well. But in my role, I'm sort of trying to draw on those resources within Bain, bring the right clients to the table and figure out, okay, what's the ideal solution that we could get to? And then what is the practical solution that we can actually put into place given the realities of the business that we're operating in?
I got it. Obviously, thank you. You help our audience understand generally some problems.
I hope so.
As you can imagine, I've worked with many a consultancy in my career. And one of the big challenges is the ability of the lead consultant or the partner to build trust and build confidence in the authority that the person brings to the conversation. As you have experienced, I'm quite sure, that there's a whole genre of business people that come in with a certain level of cynicism immediately to outside experts. How do you build that confidence? How do you get the measure of because they have to trust, what I call emergent authority. Your expertise, the chemistry, your wisdom, your follow through, your reliability. All of these things build an atmosphere where your authority, your voice is increasingly trusted. But what advice do you have? What is your lessons that you've learned, in building healthy, trustworthy, and reliable relationships with decision makers and clients?
Yeah, I mean, that you put it well. You clearly have experience in this space, because that is one of the most difficult challenges and one of the biggest contributors to whether a project will be successful or not, is that ability to build trust and to be viewed as, a trusted advisor. I feel like that's a phrase that I've heard since I started, consulting at Mercer 11 years ago, is how do you serve as a trusted advisor, not just a provider of data or a provider of analytics or whatever, specific task is being provided to you, but how do you build that relationship in a way that creates trust and creates space for uncertainty and for actually solving the problems together, and not saying, oh, I'm going to hand over a solution to you, or you're going to tell me the solution and then I'll put it on my fancy slides and play it back to you. And neither of those, in neither of those situations is the consultant going to be as effective as they can as in the case where they actually can serve in that trusted advisor capacity and help jointly problem solve to get to the best of all possible solutions.
So how do you do it?
Yeah. How do I do it? It's a question that I ask myself every day. I was talking with colleagues about that, how to do it more and more effectively. So I would say certainly executing on a plan to build that trust is it's one of those things where it's easier said than done. I think there are a few things that can cultivate that relationship and cultivate that atmosphere of trust. So I would say the first is a word you mentioned, is reliability. You need to do what you say you're going to do. You need to be honest about what you're representing and the limitations of what it is you're representing. And you need to be transparent about the downside risks. And so all of those things to me fall under the category of being reliable, because if you fail to be honest and transparent on any of those dimensions, your client may get blindsided, and therefore, even if they trust you up front, they won't trust you down the road.
Right.
The second I would say is to, I think, to be receptive to fair criticism. There's a constant possessive instinct when we come up with something, whether it's an essay that we write or an argument that we create or a chart that we build that we think really tells the story of what's happening. And there's a tendency to defend that thing that is mine, that thing that I built. And in doing so, if you're possessive over your own creations, then you will be blind to the valid feedback and criticism that other people can provide. And sometimes they provide it skillfully, and sometimes they provide it very bluntly. Depending on that, it can make it easier or harder to accept. But I think showing the ability to not only, I don't know whether it's give or take in this situation, but to both give and take, to provide insight and then to receive wisdom and input from others.
Right.
To show that responsiveness, I think that's the second, I guess, tactic that you could deploy. And then I think the third is a little bit of a softer skill, but it's just displaying human emotion and trying to connect with people at a human level. Whether this is just like a little bit of small talk before you get started, or understanding what people's weekends plans are. I talked to a client of mine where I think I was fairly successful at this, and we started talking about, he was going out to the go-kart track with his son that weekend, and so he needed to be out the door by 4 p.m. on Friday. And so we needed to end this meeting definitely on time because he was divorced and, didn't get to see his son that much. And this was his son's birthday. And so this is very important.
Right.
And starting to get beyond the veil of, I'm an expert in this area of finance that I work in, to, I'm a dad who's trying to maintain that relationship with my son. I think that humanization allows you to build a foundation of a relationship that is deeper than just the potentially transactional work that you're engaged in.
Thank you. I think the things I would accent there is the reliability. A consultant has to have the right kind of urgency. Really, I call it sort of being in the trenches, right next to the person, and have the right sense of urgency, which is the reliability. It's the energetic quality of the reliability, and the other, in terms of the iterative quality of a consultancy, where you're able to take feedback, guidance, adjust your view, take in input from the client, and then the humanization. Yeah, I think that's spot on. The reason why I bring it up, Andrew, is I'm a big believer in that the mindfulness practice cultivates natural social intelligence skills, the ability to listen effectively, to be vulnerable, not vulnerable just from the point of view of being, I'm a vulnerable person, but more from the point of view of being available, utterly available and human in your availability. An authentic connection with someone. It's not just a transaction. It's not a financial relationship. This is an authentic human moment, because often, as you are well aware, not all the time, but often, these men and women you're consulting to, this is their business. This is their career. They're living in a risk. Their not lives, but they're, to a great degree, their livelihood and who they are is at risk. So this, I've always found, at least from my point of view, that when one does the practice well, it unleashes these natural social intelligence abilities to not just be trapped in your mindset, but to be available to others. How do you see mindfulness helping you do what you do?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I totally agree with your point around consultants need to have a sense of urgency. We're being brought in and being paid more as a company than, they would pay an employee for the time period. And so when we're doing our job at our best, we serve as force multipliers for our clients, where they want to do more than they possibly can do, even if they work 24 hours a day. And so our mandate is, how can we help them do as much of that vision as possible in a way that's still sustainable for our people? And so that means being efficient, finding the most effective way of doing something, and prioritizing and triaging all of the various demands on our time and on our clients' business. And I think that point around, it's their livelihood, it's their identity, it's their sense of self. If you've been working at a company for 20 years and you've grown up in that company, the outside consultant, there's a lot of risk that, they're going to make you look bad, or they're going to take your ideas and claim credit for them. And I think that's things that not good consultants do.
Well, you're going to see things that they don't want other people to really kind of look at necessarily.
That's true. That's true. I think in that case though, then that would be a fair. Those are the kinds of things that you bring outside advisors in for. If someone is committing malfeasance.
Well, no, I'm not going that far. I'm going that. Oh, you've been. I remember one business I was working with where they had a large sales force, because you've done Salesforce. They had a large sales force that had an administrative arm that tracked commissions on sales. Booked the sale, tracked commission, boom, boom, boom. And they had, I guess, maybe 30 people in that department that were tracking the sales and the commissions and all that kind of stuff. Literally on the same floor of the building over there was an order entry department doing the exact same thing, but wasn't being paid by the salespeople to make sure they got their checks. And it was, you could lose 40 headcount right there. Not that I like firing people, but they had created this infrastructure for the salespeople to make themselves feel comfortable about getting paid. And frankly, the CEO was kind of embarrassed that he had let this thing grow over the years. And it was not cheap.
Yeah.
Because it had a separate software, separate tracking, separate reporting, separate pay structures,
And to that point, you've allowed, effectively, you weren't paying attention, and you allowed a instance of mismanagement to spiral to the point where now you've got 30 or 40 people's lives that are dependent on this mismanagement, and now you've got a moral calm about what to do in this situation.
Well, and for me, as the HR guy at the time, it was embarrassing because there were 40 people who were doing a job that was unnecessary. Now, that's not cool. People want to really contribute. They don't want to do that. But I'm sorry I'm bringing this conversation off in this direction, but my point was it wasn't so much about fiscal irresponsibility or that kind of thing. It was more that a consultant often discovers things that had not been attended to, that had been ignored, whether it's market conditions, competitive activities, infrastructural problems, and that can often be difficult to help people see.
And I think to bring it back to your original question about how does mindfulness help, I think, one of the ways to try and still affect positive change in a situation like that is to, understand the perspective of the various, client stakeholders. Who are the people that you are working with today? What is their point of view? What is their perception of themselves, of their organization? And then figure out how can we position the work that we're doing as not about, pointing out things that were done wrong in the past necessarily, because let's be honest, everybody has opportunities to improve almost everything in some one dimension or another, but more about how do we do the right thing going forward for the company, for the people who work for it, for the customers that we serve. That's, I think, a reframe that you can try to deploy, but if you're not mindful in your interactions with those clients in the first introductions, you're not going to be able to pick up on their cues and how they really feel and read between the lines, because you're going to be thinking too much about, okay, well, what is my follow-up question that I want to ask? What is the next thing on the interview guide that I need to get to? What is the time? What's the next meeting that I have? Oh, I just got an email. I'm getting pings on Teams and Skype, and, Outlook is blowing up. And
let me repeat back what I hear you saying. What you're saying is, one of the downstream impacts of mindfulness in terms of consulting is it helps you attend to the social cues that give you a genuine understanding of the needs of your client, versus what a consultancy tends to do is try to collect information that helps them meet their objective.
Right.
And that kind of attentiveness to the social cues helps you more skillfully influence, guide, and advise. Is that what I heard you say?
I think that's very well put, better than I said it. And I would say that's just a more expansive view of the information that you're gathering.
Right.
And so when we talk about having to build a trusted advisor relationship in order to actually help, clients succeed and put them in a place where they are willing to listen to the hopefully good advice you're providing, picking up on those social cues and being able to incorporate the various social and political dynamics within an organization into not just the recommendation, but how you socialize the recommendation, how you build the recommendation and involve people throughout that process. I think that's all just like that becomes your own personal force multiplier, where you're able to think about the things beyond just the numbers on the page or the outside research reports or whatever.
Yeah.
And one other example, Michael, from early in my career, I think I was 2 or 3 years out of undergrad. I had an econ degree and a political science minor. I'd never taken any business courses. I was good with numbers, but I didn't really have any business background to speak of. But I was at a consulting firm and going to clients and trying to help them do things. And, this was at Mercer. We were doing HR consulting. And, I could build a spreadsheet and do, Excel analysis pretty well. I could copy those things into charts and put them into PowerPoint. But then when we were in the meetings, being able to pivot between the work that we had created for this project and drawing on a reservoir of experiences, from decades of working with clients in this industry, I just didn't have that repository in my head of all those experiences to be able to respond as effectively as, the partners that I was working with at the time. And so one way that I tried to add value there was to, I would take notes, I would be diligent, I would try and respond if I thought I had something smart to say, but I would try to scan the room and keep an eye on what different people's reactions were to the proposed recommendation, to the suggestion that was thrown out. If we're in workshops, how are people interacting with each other? And I found that became one of the most valuable things that I could do, and how I became a trusted advisor to the partners that I was working with, because I could say, oh, well, the VP really sort of seemed to just turn his head and cross his arms. You can't really see on the screen, but and I got into sort of reading body language books and trying to understand, like, how do people put up those defensive mechanisms, and how do you witness when that happens, and what drove that to be the case, to try and help break down those barriers.
Yeah, see, I'm glad you're bringing this up, because one of the things that I have found, and I'm a big proponent of this, is Goldman in his book Social Intelligence has written about this, but essentially we're hardwired to resonate with each other. We are hardwired. That we are able to read each other's cues, pick up on the kind of nonverbal invitations, insights, concerns that each other has. We're hardwired for that. However, we tend to speed past it because our minds are not trained to unleash these natural qualities of the mind. And we all know that by doing this practice, self-awareness, skyrocket. Man, all you have to do is sit there for 20 minutes and not do anything. You become self-aware. You might not like it, but you're self-aware. And then you regulate. You escort your attention from a thought to the experience, and you begin to self-regulate. So self-awareness, self-regulation, that's all a very natural aspect of the practice. But the next aspect of this is this attunement with your experience. Whether it's just the natural breeze in the room, or the fact that that person feels sad to me, or how that person can tell a joke really well, or whatever it happens to be, So I'm glad you brought that up, that, while you actually use those skills as a way to sort of enhance your partner's ability in the room, the consultancies when you're a young man, I have noted and have trained business people in meditation from the point of view of unleashing these abilities to attune, resonate, read the situation well, pause a little bit. Don't just listen to words, listen to body, tone, atmosphere, this kind of skill. It's a skill,
Well, being able to pause and be comfortable with silence and be comfortable with space is it's not a super common trait, I found. And people will often try and fill that space. But when you fill that space, sometimes, there are people like, I'm very extroverted. And so I'll talk as pretty much whatever people give me a chance to. And so I've tried to consciously dial that back and consciously not say the first thing that comes to mind to make sure that we hear from other people who are important and influential and may have great ideas that will make the answer to our problem, even clearer, even better than it would have if we had just sort of like been in a race to see, okay, who can jump in next. But then there is, there is also always the pressure of, you're being paid to have an opinion, and you need to have an opinion, and you need to have a point of view on something. So there's those sorts of dynamics, and I try to thread the needle as much as I can, but I cannot claim to be a master of it as of yet.
It's interesting. I do a lot of work with data scientists, and they have all of the data that you need, but they don't know how to deliver it in ways that people can embrace it. They don't have good influencing skills. So I hear you. Enterprise leaders want expertise. That's why they're paying you the big bucks. But I'll tell you, at the end of the day, what they're looking for is to be confidently influenced. That's what they're really looking for.
Yeah.
Because you got the expertise, you got the data. It's how do you confidently influence me to use that data, understand that data, to take a risk with that data. That's what they're really looking for. Yeah. Let's move on. Let's move on to this other topic. I noticed that you do some work. You've recently done some work in higher ed, which is fascinating. I've been doing some work there, especially since what is it? The data shows this is somewhat old, but like what? 60% of liberal arts colleges are going to close over the next 10 years or some crazy number. Are you familiar with that number?
No, I have not heard that.
The 60 is probably high. It's probably more like 30 or 40. And I don't have the data, but there's a lot of small colleges that cannot maintain the infrastructural issues. But anyway, it looked to me, I can't remember what I was reading. Maybe you can help me understand that looks like you were working on some social responsibility aspects with a university there to help students of low income have a higher graduation rate. Is that my recollection accurate?
Yes, yeah, that's correct. So we were working with a local higher ed institution, a university that had over the last 15 or 20 years increased their graduation rates from the sort of low 30% up to sort of 55, 57, 59% in a 15-year period. And then because they were often the first step, when you look at the students who go there for 2 years to start their educational career and then transfer to another program, the graduation rates were north of 80%. So that's a very meaningful improvement. But one of the most impressive parts of this was that they did it while eliminating equity gaps. That's the official lingo in the higher ed world. But what that means in plain human English is that Black, Hispanic, low income, and first generation students now graduate above the average of the university.
Right.
And that those two things in parallel, there are a number of other statistics. Their incoming SAT scores, their incoming GPAs declined over that period. So the predictors of success, if you sort of looked outside in, it's not like they were just cherry picking the best students. They were actually identifying ways to break down systematic barriers, to find where students who did not have the family networks or social relationships outside of the school to help them navigate these complex bureaucracies, right, where those people were falling out of the system, and then identified ways to proactively address those to keep them on board. And sometimes it would be grants as low as $100 or $500 to pay off parking tickets because you had to park illegally because you were running from your job to class and you just had to park and get into class. And so you got a parking ticket as a result. And then that could have kept you from going on to the next quarter and enrolling in classes. Or the school would say, we'd rather keep you in school than collect those parking tickets. So that's just one example of the type of program that they implement.
Yeah, it's a beautiful example. I mean,
and I wish I could take credit for any of that work. They did all that on their own. What we helped with was they had this success, and as a result, higher education institutions from all over the country, HBCUs, and then other institutions, including Harvard, Vanderbilt, very prestigious elite institutions, asked them, how did you do this? How did you eliminate equity gaps? This is a problem that we're struggling with as well. And they were overburdened by the demands on their time while they still had to do their full-time jobs of administering this university. And so what we did was we helped them, basically look at the higher education, effectively consulting and support landscape to find a niche where they weren't going to be competing with a bunch of incumbents. We helped them define the various programs across a number of different dimensions of their approach to build what was sort of their secret sauce, how they were able to do this. And then we built out a set of offerings that they could provide to other institutions in a structured and scalable way. And so that the first piece of work that I did with them, I did. There was lots of us involved in this, but the work that we did was to do all of those different, we call them work streams that I just described, and then build a cohesive vision for what they could accomplish over the next 10 years. Those materials were then used to fundraise for this nonprofit that they were setting up that was going to be independent of, but affiliated with, I don't know if that's the exact right terminology, but it was basically a separate institution that would effectively provide educational consulting services to these higher ed institutions that needed help, with the goal of increasing graduation rates by a meaningful amount at their clients. And so then the second phase of work was they had successfully fundraised. They had hired a bunch of staff. They had brought on 30 plus clients. And then they realized that they needed help figuring out, how do we build a case for change? How do we motivate these schools to action? How do we break down silos across departments, history, English, business, math, at these institutions to get people on board with the changes in the structure to, how they deliver coursework, how they deliver financial aid, how they deliver tutoring, all of that stuff. And so we help them figure out, here's how you build a diagnostic, and here's how you serve as a sort of consultant and advisor to other organizations in an effective way.
Good luck with breaking down silos in higher ed. Good luck.
There's always degrees. There's degrees of freedom.
They're so rigid. The thing that I found in the work that I was doing is, there were many things, but in this area, is the health and well-being as kind of a key ingredient for low-income men and women moving from neighborhoods of high risk, difficult, traumatic childhoods into higher educational settings where there were expectations on how they would socially conduct themselves, engage, and that many of them had health and well-being challenges. And it was one of the things that was striking to me was that the model that high schools used in working with young people with kind of emotional problems. I forget the name of it. There's like a department where you help kids that maybe have trauma.
Behavioral health, maybe?
Yeah, and then there's certain budgets for all that, but they're kind of cleaved out of the mainstream. They're helped in a particular way. And then when college comes, everyone comes in there equally. And there was this very interesting model of really making health and well-being as a common kind of resource for everybody, where it wasn't just for your deficiencies. There, yoga, meditation, diet, health, all kinds of services were provided so that people of low income could come in and get the services that they weren't getting prior in the neighborhoods they were coming from and the difficult families they were coming from. I found that very, very fascinating. Did you bump into any of that dynamic in your studies? I mean, in your analysis?
So I think the approach that they took was not as centered on health and wellness, but I hear a lot of echoes in what you're describing in the work that our client had done to support their students. So I do believe there were programs to help make sure that folks had sort of meals when they were on campus, and there are sort of food pantries and things like that available as resources for students who needed that kind of support. I think there is also, you talked about in high school carving out the students from the main population.
Special education, special ed. That's what
special education, right? And so I think the way that they viewed students that need extra support, there's first, you want to try and get to students in high school and start preparing them for college then. Let them know that college is actually a possibility for them, and then start teaching them the skills and providing summer programs to get them on board. The second was look at your applicant pool. And there was something, it was called the summer melt, where the students would apply and they would get accepted to college. And then somewhere along the way, they wouldn't show up in the fall.
Right.
And the question was why? And maybe it was they didn't know they had to apply for FAFSA. Maybe it was they didn't qualify for, the math courses that they needed to get into. There's, any number of reasons why that might happen. Yep. And what they started doing was looking at the data that they had, which they collected very meticulously, to identify what was causing people to fall out of the program during this critical period. And then it became, we're providing a freshman year experience course where we actually tell people, here's what it's like to go to college. Here are all the things that you're going to have to demand. And here are the resources that are available to help you if you ever have challenges. Advising in a way that was effective and proactive and data-driven. That became another way of helping students once they were actually in the door. And then making sure you were providing tutoring support from peers and mentors, providing supplementary instruction from, like the academics, the professors themselves, to make sure that folks who were not doing well, they had, I can't remember what the exact term was, sort of like flagship courses, where if you do poorly in, let's just say, like Calc 1,
right,
then it's likely that you're going to not do well in a number of other courses that are really critical. Or if you fail in the first, freshman English class, you're likely not going to build the skills. And so then we need to give people help early and often to make sure that you get them up above the bar they need to pass so they feel confident and are able to continue to progress.
This is in the same realm. It was very interesting. We'll move on to two more topics that we could talk about before we close. But it was fascinating to me about how COVID, to a great degree, really exposed a lot of these dynamics of young people coming into college settings with a level of social disorientation, whether it's emotional, whether it's skill set, not being able to navigate institutions. And the interesting insight was that this model of special education that's for the people who can do it right. Oh, but this is how you do it over here. The college was saying, no, you really want to create a health and well-being resource for everybody, whether you're really good at going to college or you want to have a wider range of invitation to make this as part of the institution rather than kind of special Eddie. Anyway, I found that fascinating.
And in doing so, eliminate the stigma associated with that. I mean, I think that's one of the big things that type of approach, a more sort of like universalistic approach to delivering those services, which makes a lot of sense to me.
Here's another one. We have a little more time here. Thank you for your time, as always.
Thank you.
It wasn't too long ago. It was a few years ago. McKinsey was real big on mindfulness. Do you recall that? Were you following that at all? They did a lot of things about what was going to define the future of health and well-being in organizational settings and generally culturally. And I think that the head person that ran McKinsey was a meditator, and they had actually begun to look at a practice around bringing mindfulness into leadership, organizational settings. Sure enough, they were kind of saw the trend, so to speak, the secularization of it in organizational settings. What do you see? You go from organizations to organizations. Is your antenna up about where mindfulness is being applied in workplace settings? Do you see any of it, or what's your take on that?
That's a good question. It definitely sounds to me like a trend, like hopping on a trend, quite frankly.
Right.
Bain pays for Headspace for all of its employees. So I have a free Headspace premium account.
Right.
I can't say that I really use it. I kind of prefer to meditate in silence, but I know that can be a really valuable entry point for a lot of people. I would not say, though, that I have seen meditation or mindfulness practices very systematically applied at really any of the clients that I've worked with.
Right.
I've heard, so there will be mindfulness programs. Bain would sponsor mindfulness programs for us, during COVID, summer of 2020. There were a few of the health and well-being where mindfulness was sort of prominently featured, and they would have different speakers come in and provide meditation instruction. It's interesting because to me, meditation has always had a bit of a spiritual component to it.
Sure. I'd say I would say not just a bit. For me personally,
yeah,
it's fundamentally a spiritual gesture from the point of view of spiritual meaning in one's life.
Yeah.
But go on, go ahead.
And so then taking mindfulness and putting it into a business setting, it's one of those things where it may be a good thing for people to do for their mental health and well-being. It is, I would say, it's going to be hard to draw a direct line between that and the return on that investment that you might get. I would say, if anything, you might wind up with fewer employees wanting to work as much as you want them to work when they connect with a more deeper spiritual component of their life.
You think so?
I think it depends on the kind of work that you're doing. And I think
fair enough.
Maybe
that's fair. That's fair enough. That's a good point.
I'm very lucky that I love my job, and this is the best job I've ever had. But most jobs that I've had, and I've worked in a lot of manual labor. I worked as a maintenance man at Carmicholing. I worked as a breakfast and lunch chef there. I worked doing the buffet line at a local diner. I worked as a bookstore clerk in Caroline DeMayo's bookstore, Northern Lights. So I had a lot of, and then I was a roofer for a while. I was a painter. I did, it's a tough job, and it made me very appreciative of a desk job once I got it, quite frankly. But those jobs, they're challenging. And then even when I had desk jobs, there were times where I was like, is what I'm doing making a difference? Does anyone care? Is this adding meaning? I heard people say work gives you a sense of purpose. That was a common refrain that I've heard frequently in political debates and political, from pundits where, people need work to give themselves a sense of meaning. And I think because there's a line between the work that we do and the fact that we need to work in a productive manner, and that productive capacity adds to society and then generates a paycheck that we can use at home to support our families. There's that line where I think when I was younger, I was sort of cynical, where I was like, well, if you're flipping burgers and making fries, or, hauling roof shingles up to the top of a roof, how much meaning am I getting out of this? I don't know. It was like, we would use the paycheck to buy beer on the ride home, and we were driving in a van, and in the back, mind you, not driving the van myself. And so I guess it's one of those things where I haven't seen it. I remember the push for it. I will see, I think what I have seen, and this was mostly pre-COVID, because honestly, we do a lot of work remotely. And so you miss the impromptu interactions, you miss seeing the things on the bulletin board. I remember seeing things on the bulletin boards at clients that would say, meditation group this time in this room.
Right.
And so you would see that spontaneous organization. And that way, people that feel magnetized to it, that want to seek that, feel that that's a way that you can have a sort of selection effect that generates a positive result.
You're singing my song. I've been saying this. I'm getting older now. I'm getting older. I'm old now. I've always found a programmatic approach to mindfulness in the workplace is more an inflicting of mindfulness on people. I mean, it's like, but when you create an atmosphere that magnetizes interest and it self-organizes, you know what I mean? Obviously, you need to have an atmosphere that respects it and appreciates it, and that kind of thing. I have found, particularly in pharmaceutical settings where I do a lot of work, that naturally occurs. There's a group of people who like meditating. They bring in a few experts. It gets around that there's a Wednesday meditation session. People show up. And that kind of organic organizing dynamic really does seem to be the approach, rather than, we have a mindful organization and all people have mindfulness inflicted on them, So you're singing to the believer here, but let me just say something about the spiritual aspect. The reason why I'm not afraid of speaking about spiritual dynamics in the workplace is because I've done a lot of work with leaders, leadership development, et cetera, is when you really boil down some of the most difficult challenges of leaders, the challenges almost invariably are what I call spiritual challenges, like confidence, having confidence in the midst of uncertainty. And that is a spiritual issue at its core, inspiring the best in others. That's not a technique. That's not something that you get a formula and some kind of spreadsheet and feed the beast with. That's a spiritual thing that you care about people, that you can see what is decent and good and wholesome and talented in people, and you want to inspire that. So I don't shy away from the spiritual aspect of the workplace. But I don't like the whole religiosity of spirituality, in any case. So go ahead.
Yeah. Well, so I like that, that framing and description of spirituality and tying it to traits that are actually valued in the workplace, the confidence, the ability to inspire others, the ability to project a vision into the world of what you think is a better place, right, and how to make it so. Yep. Whether it's in your finance or HR organization, or in your company as a whole, or in your community outside of the four walls of your business. And so I really like that. We'll see if I can make it fit in my schedule. But now I'm thinking I've always toyed around with having like a Wednesday meditation session, 30 minutes, just sitting in a conference room quietly, not talking about anything. Yeah. So maybe I'll bring that back up. But there's one thing that we're past an hour now. One of my favorite podcasters always says, now that you're past an hour, you can let your hair down. And so one of the things that I heard when you were talking about the inflicting meditation and mindfulness on people is like you're taking this spiritual practice and you're saying, like, we're going to get an extra 50 bips of profitability this quarter because you all sat here and meditated. And it reminded me of this joke I saw on the internet where it was like, LSD in the 60s, like, you're going to free your mind. LSD today, if I take teeny tiny amounts, I can generate more productive capital for my boss. And so when I think about mindfulness in the workplace, I want to avoid that latter setting where it's a tool, to be more, it's a tool to like generate more money, which feels like the cynical materialist spin on it. And more, it's a tool to make you feel more fulfilled. It's a tool to help you be fulfilled and be connected with the people you work with, which is fundamentally a social enterprise.
You're striking what I believe one of the critical points in understanding the application of mindfulness in organizational settings or in everyday life, which is this. We all, particularly in business, we look at effort. And I've said this a billion times, and people in the audience have probably heard me say it if they've heard me talk before. We apply effort in order to achieve things. And we're all really good at it. Really. I mean, you just look at, just this computer that we're doing right here. This is amazing that we as human beings have worked to achieve this. So we're really good at the effort of getting somewhere and achieving stuff. Mindfulness is not that kind of effort. It's not the effort of getting somewhere. It's the effort of being somewhere. And this effort of being is more about expressing qualities of the mind than achieving something. That's very disconcerting to the typical modern workplace men and women, because it's like, am I doing this right? How much do I have to do? What's the result? There is no result. It's about becoming utterly familiar with your experience. That's not an achievement. That's not something you get to. It's something that you express. So this effort of becoming familiar with your experience rather than achieving something is very intimate and very human. And it develops, it unleashes a whole set of human talents. Just being able to listen or to see or to appreciate an atmosphere or pick up a cue that you would have sped past because you're trying to achieve something. And way too often, mindfulness is, if you only sit 5 minutes a day, your social intelligence skills will go up and your immune will be repaired. It's like, guys, can we relax here? Can we just be here together? So you and I resonate on that. Let me ask you this now that our hair is down after an hour. Let me ask you this final question, which I ask all my guests. You're a young man, so you would be able to, probably offer an answer to this that's more relevant, maybe. I don't know. But, what three pieces of advice do you have to people in engaging mindfulness in a modern world? What advice do you have for people who would go, I think I'd like to do this, or I'd like to go on that journey? What advice would you have for them?
Michael, I knew the question was coming. I don't know if it makes it any easier to come up with three good pieces of advice, but I'll do my best.
Good.
So I think the first thing, if people are considering it or have been doing it, is don't overthink it. I think to call back to some of the themes that we've been talking about, there's a constant push in our culture today to optimize and to focus on, tracking and measuring everything. And so you'll get apps that track your meditation and say, are you meditating more minutes today than you did yesterday? And what's your streak of meditating? And I think that if it helps you start the habit, that can be good. But you want to make sure that it's not just another distraction and not just another obsession. And, I don't know whose quote this is, but the root of all of mankind's challenges is his inability to sit quietly in a room by himself, right? That's at least a paraphrase of some sort of quote.
Well, this way, if we can't find out who said it, you just said it. So thank you.
I definitely was not the first. So, I would say the first thing is don't overthink it and just do it. That's definitely Nike. So we know where that came from. I think the second piece of advice is don't limit yourself to applying mindfulness at work. Don't limit yourself to only applying mindfulness outside of your work. Think about mindfulness as just a basic part of being human, just like balance and core strength and getting a good night's sleep. Being mindful and being present. Road rage. I think you've talked about road rage in the past. It's something I struggle with too. I'll get a little road rage, especially here in Atlanta, and then I'll be able to drop it pretty quickly. But there are times when I can't drop it. You know, not road rage necessarily, but just like something feels off. My wife, Nora, luckily does a great job of, calling attention to this, maybe sometimes when I'm in denial about it. But I find that noticing that unpleasant feeling in my body, whether it's because of a work situation or whether it's because of anxiety or fear that is manifesting as a result of, a meeting that didn't go well, or, a rating that I'm uncertain about how it's going to come in. I think, or whether it's because, I broke my wife's favorite ceramic bowl and now I have to tell her about it. And that's making me feel nervous. Taking the blinders off of mindfulness and just cultivating mindfulness practice in your life, period, will make you sort of more in touch with yourself, and therefore with other people. And so whether that's at work and whether that makes you more effective at work, that's great. If it just makes you happier at work, whether or not that makes you more effective, I might say that if you're happier, you probably will be more effective by default. But so don't overthink it. Don't limit it to work. And sort of as a result, don't try and quantify the benefits of it. Just do it and see what happens. And then I think the third thing, and this is one of my favorite quotes of all time from the famous orators, Bill and Ted, is just be excellent to each other.
Right.
And I think that one of the things that troubles me the most about our current moment is the judgment of everyone else that can be so rewarded by people who agree with you, whether it's people who, you can look down your noses at someone else who doesn't meditate because you meditate, to take one example that I've seen. Or, I feel like when meditation was all the rage in Silicon Valley, it's I've achieved enlightenment, and what have you achieved, and it's
to meet that person.
I don't think I do, actually.
I would. I haven't meet,
but maybe. But I think that said be excellent to each other, but finding that compassion for other people, and trying to not worry about whether you're being made a fool of in a situation, but just being compassionate for the struggles that other people are having go on in the world. Like we're talking about the reaction, the negative reaction folks can have to consultants, and you can say, oh, well, this person's afraid we're going to find something bad in their organization, or they're afraid that they're going to be open about their ideas, and you're going to present it as your own idea and take all the credit for it, and that's going to limit their advancement in a career that they view as a core part of their job. And so I think there's a lot of different ways to view and frame things, and if you try to take the posture of compassion first, understanding first, kindness first, as embodied in that, be excellent to each other phrase.
Yep.
I think that will do a lot of good.
Yeah, I think
regardless of how many minutes you meditate a day.
Amplify just a tiny bit of that last point is, one of the things I learned over time is mindfulness awareness meditation is really fundamentally about making friends with yourself. There's a tenderness toward oneself that occurs, that it isn't a technique for mastering being human so as to be more effective in life. It's about making friends with yourself and being kind to yourself. And that tenderness, when actually unleashed in a very gentle way toward yourself on the cushion, naturally expresses out to others, like you're saying, actually, would you be excellent with each other? Because first you were excellent to yourself, that you were kind to yourself. So that's a great note to end on there, my friend. Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other final remarks before we close?
I I don't think so. But Michael, thank you for the time this evening. I had a ton of fun. Really appreciate the conversation, and thank you for taking the time on an evening late into the night to talk about all these topics with me. It was a real pleasure for me.
What else would I be doing? Watching, I don't know, the Great Bake Off, British Bake Off or something. I got that hanging out with you is a lot of fun. So thank you. This is an honor and a joy, Andrew. And also, not to go back to your dad again, but I loved your dad so much, and I had such a good time with him doing stuff. And just to have this conversation with you about this topic, it resonates with me deeply. So I appreciate your time and your joy and your cheerfulness. And congratulations on your 13-month-old baby.
Thank you so much. And I know my dad was a great admirer of yours, and a big inspiration for Applied Mindfulness Training as well was the work that you were doing. So it's just nice to actually get to interact one-on-one, not just have you teach meditation to me, but now we actually get to have a dialogue about some of these tricky topics.
You're the best. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.